Hello. I just want to say a few words on this upcoming summit between Biden and Putin in Geneva. Geneva, of course, is a city famous for diplomacy, and this is by no means the first historic summit there. Um, I'm not going to go through a list off the top of my head of other famous meetings there. I know Reagan and Gorbachev met, I think it was 85. They also had the Reykjavik summit. I can't recall off the top of my head which came first. But anyway, uh, it's a small city, but an important city in international affairs. There's a lot to say about this. It's been a very busy week for the president. Indeed, it's been a busy week for other Western leaders, with the G7 summit in Cornwall, the NATO summit in Brussels, and now this meeting between Biden and Putin. There will be one school of thought that says Biden shouldn't even be going ahead with this. I know Gary Kasparov, the famous dissident and former chess player, was asked about this on CNN, and his view is that it legitimizes Putin. It shouldn't even be going ahead because words are all very well, but actions need to follow. And Biden hasn't minced his words. He's called Putin a killer. RT claims that that was a media hyping things up. Uh, RT, of course, are all over this. They're presenting it in a very glowing light. And of course putting their anti-West, pro-Russia spin on it. Um, just briefly on the point of RT, I've spoken about them numerous times before. I love RT. I think it's a disgrace to journalism, and I think that whilst you get other networks that will have nationalistic bias, RT really excels in that. I mean, this was a network that was set up by Russian ultra nationalists, and if you look in its history, you would struggle to find a single occasion where RT has been critical of Putin, Putinism, or Russian foreign policy. Not once. Not once. That is contrasted with the BBC and CNN, where you can find many examples of those networks, wherever you think of them, being critical of American and British policy. So there's no comparison as far as I'm concerned. Um, and I have to be honest, when I hear Western voices on RT, when I hear Americans and Brits who are working for that network, I feel sick, quite honestly. To put it bluntly, I think they're stabbing their countries in the back. And if we were in a state of war, I believe they would be committing treason by providing critical communications to the enemy or with the enemy. I mean, is there really any moral difference uh, between what they're doing and what would be the implications in a time of war, other than we aren't technically in a time of war? But yeah, I do wonder where their conscience is. No doubt, they're smart people. They'll find a way to gloss it over, like we're only showing the Russian perspective, but they're working for the Kremlin. They really, really are. When you really delve into it, that is what they're doing because they're willfully and knowingly pushing Putin's line on international issues. And, RT treat conspiracy theories as news. Um, they have a very sarcastic sort of overture about how they go about things, um, in a way that you certainly wouldn't see with the BBC, possibly with CNN, but it's a particularly smarmy approach that they have to journalism, which again, I don't have respect for. I think it's unprofessional. But I think they're clever enough to manipulate a lot of people. They're clever enough to have misled the world on Syria, or at least a good portion of the world, for years. But anyway, that's my RT take out of the way. Regarding the summit itself, I'm confident that Biden will be true to his word and he will be direct. It's going to be a very formal summit. There will be no lunch. I imagine that's not just for time reasons. I imagine that is sending out a message that we mean business. There's not going to be any niceties here. It's not going to be. We're not going to put on a facade of friendliness. Um, and that's probably the right approach because, Putin is quite a crafty operator. Charming certainly the wrong word, but I think he can be quite manipulative in terms of, as an example of this, when he met with Angela Merkel. knowing her fear of dogs, he let a dog wander around the room. It's like, almost Bond villainish. Very, I think Biden was right to call Putin a worthy opponent in the sense that he can't be underestimated. Putin is a very powerful figure and has been for pretty much the entire 21st century. He can't be underestimated. I do think Putin's power in Russia is starting to be seriously threatened because let's not forget many Russians took to the streets in support of Alexei Navalny. So we must always look at the prism of Russia as a complex society. You know, it might be true that Putin still enjoys the majority support, but I do think that is declining, and I wouldn't trust sources like RT as a good barometer of where what support really is. It's important to understand the Russian system. It's not China. It's not a single party state. Technically, and I mean in very technical terms here, it's a democracy, but I would say it's a greatly, I would say it's not a true working democracy because in Russian presidential elections, Putin gets pretty much 90% of the airtime. Now, some of his rivals, if we look at domestic opposition, there are some shifty characters that make even Putin look moderate. Someone like Vladimir Zhirinovsky, for example, who is an outright fascist. No reasonable person will want someone like that in the Kremlin more than Putin. But I do think Putin is a destabilizing force in the world. Definitely a destabilizing force for liberal democracies. I mean, you just have to look at the checklist. Propping up the Assad regime in Syria, basically invading Ukraine and illegally annexing Crimea, um, using gas pipelines as a weapon, undermining Western democracies. The Salisbury attack, let's not forget in the UK, Russia hasn't come up with any satisfactory explanation as to why it wasn't involved. Um, Attacks on dissidents in other countries, the treatment of Alexei Navalny and other dissidents within Russia, the generally bad human rights record under Putin, the absolute attacks on journalists in Russia. This is the irony of RT. They talk about telling it like it is, and they have one segment called "Watching the Hawks," like they are great pacifists. The hypocrisy stings. Um, And I would say, yeah, RT is another factor, how it uses Russian state media to promote conspiracy theories. And I would say an attempt to, because in an attempt to bring instability in the West, election interference, the list goes on. The shooting down of MH17, all of these things have happened on Putin's watch. Now, to the blame the West first lobby, I would make this point. You have on one hand Vladimir Putin, and you have on the other hand five American presidents, including the last year of Clinton's era, um, five British prime ministers, and numerous other Western leaders, and Russian dissidents for that matter. Now, you either take the view that Putin's right and they're all wrong, or maybe, just maybe, they're right and Putin is wrong. And, every time a new prime minister or president comes in, there's notions of a reset. That's why Biden you know, maybe this summit shouldn't go ahead. It is now, but maybe creating summits like this just gives Putin legitimacy that he doesn't deserve. Um, I don't know, but it is going ahead, and as Kasparov says, it has to be actions and not words. I think Biden needs to be tough, and he needs to say point blank, Mr. Putin, we're not messing around here. This has to be because Putin very much models himself on this tough guy image. Domestically in the US, there's a lot of Americans think Biden's weak. I think that's quite ironic because of the five American presidents who have been in office during Putin's time. One of them, Donald Trump, has a very ambiguous record when it comes to Russia. True, the State Department expelled Russian diplomats after Salisbury, but Trump personally was anything but tough on Putin. And, for Trump cultists to blindly praise him and like to talk about Beijing Biden, in terms of the current president's their perceived uh, uh, their perceived outlook as to Biden's stance on China. I think they're wrong on that. I think Biden is no fan of China. I don't think he's soft on China, but regardless, they cannot honestly, with a straight face, say that Trump was consistently tough on Putin because he wasn't. Donald Trump stood beside the Russian autocrat and basically complained about the Western media. He complained about his own security services. At best, Trump's record on Putin can be seen as ambiguous. Yes, the State Department took tough actions, but Donald Trump personally, I think, was far, far too cozy to Putin. And he would come out with statements like, oh, I don't know the man, I'm sure. I see no reason why the Russians would. He was basically acting as a cheerleader for Putin, more or less. Um, contrast that with other American presidents. Whatever faults they may have had, they never pandered to Putin in the way that Trump did. Um, Bush 43 famously said he could get the icy, I think, forget the verbatim, but it was something along the lines of I looked into Putin's icy soul. Um, the fact is that relations have declined on Putin's watch. That's his record. As a domestic president, like if I'm looking at Putin from a Russian perspective, I'm thinking, okay, well, he somewhat stabilized the Russian economy from the Yeltsin years. He did make Russia a force to be reckoned with on the world stage, right? Russians are a fiercely proud people. Russia is a great nation, and under Yeltsin, it was a bit of a mess. Rising crime levels, an economy in a bad way, and Yeltsin himself was seen as a bit of a buffoon. By contrast, looked like a tough guy. He did bring some stability, so you can see where the support lies. It's not difficult to see where that came from. But at this point, I do believe that image is definitely eroding. Um, and I think the longer Putin clings on to power, the more Russians will turn against him. He has support right now, broadly speaking, but the demonstrations earlier this year were unprecedented, really, even surpassing I think it was the 2010 protests. So Putin doesn't have a guarantee of this iron grip of power. He has the apparatus, he has state media, he has the military on his side. In that sense, he's in a fairly comfortable position, but I do think dissent will grow. I believe that. Um, but I don't, I'm not optimistic that things will improve so long as Putin is in power. Now he's, what, 67, 68. He could be in power until his late 70s. Biden 78. Putin could be in power even till his early 80s. If we look at those old communist leaders, Yuri Andropov, Chernenko, Brezhnev, they all stayed in office well into their 70s and 80s. So it's not inconceivable that Putin will as well. So unfortunately, for the near future at least, I would say at least the next decade, things are going to be tense with Russia. And that's sad. It's tragic because there was optimism in the Clinton Yeltsin years. There were differences over the conduct of the First Chechen War and certainly over the Balkans, but broadly speaking, relations did improve in contrast to the post Cold War era. Under Putin, they have once again declined. And at some point, you have to stop blaming Washington, London, and Berlin and Paris, and you have to consider, well, actually, maybe the problem here is Putin. Now, we can't remove Putin from power, but I do think we have a vested interest um, in encouraging the Russian opposition. I'm not talking about a sort of covert operation or something like that. But I do think we can do things that delegitimize Putin for the autocrat that he is. You know, Russian presidential election, I doubt it was free and fair. Maybe not comparable to some of the things that go on in developing countries, but when you consider the amount of airtime that state media gives Putin, when you consider the bias that the likes of RT has to Putin, then it's not difficult to see why he constantly gets into power the way he does. And yeah, some of it may be genuinely that Russians see him as the best alternative. Um, Navalny's not without fault. In the past he had some links to nationalist groups, but I think he's a very capable man. What's happening to him right now? If he dies in prison, um, it would be awful, absolutely awful. But we also look at proxy situations going on, like in Belarus. Um, Putin's support for Lukashenko. Many Belarusians are sick of that regime. Um, so there's a lot of things going on here. But one thing is absolutely for sure, we cannot, and by we I'm talking about the West, cannot think that we just make a reset and maybe for a while things will be good. Putin cannot be trusted. I think the last 20 years shows that. There will be areas of mutual concern, but I think we need to start seeing Putin for the autocrat that he is. And those Westerners who always like to blame the West first, and they, you know, say that it's the West to blame for escalating tensions. I mean, one of the things they cite is EU enlargement and NATO encroaching on the Russian border. Well, if you want to look at that, then consider some of Russia's actions as well. Okay, call for de-escalation if you want, point fingers at the West, but at least be consistent and say that Russia has also escalated tensions. I cannot stomach those who would stab their country in the back by blaming everything on the West and holding absolutely no accountability to Putin's behavior whatsoever. Um, I do see the argument that maybe this summit shouldn't even go ahead. Clearly, nothing's really going to be solved. In that sense, it won't be that historic. Um, but when we look at the Helsinki summit of 2018 between Putin and Trump, again, it didn't really resolve anything. Russia has continued to act belligerently. RT continues pushing out its rubbish. Under Putin, I don't think we can work with Russia in such a way that in a normal relationship. I don't think we can have normalization. I wouldn't call for cutting all ties. I think that's even with China. I don't think that you can have a situation where absolutely all communication is cut off. Again, there might be mutual interests. Say, for example, you have I don't know, a ship that's attacked in the off the coast of Somalia, and pirates get joint Russian British crew. Not that that would really happen, but there are certain scenarios. Climate change is another one. Where we can probably work with Russia on, or even criminal activity. But I believe that again, the Kremlin is so murky in the way it goes about things that even if we were to have sort of an operation against the Russian mafia, we can't count on Putin to help us out because it's very likely that he has links to Russian mafia. I mean, the corruption in Russia is rife. So I think that there's a lot of question marks over not question marks. I just don't think we can trust Putin. It's that simple. Because, what will be happening right now is Putin and the Kremlin will be seeing Biden as just another American president they can use. And then, they know that in 4 years or 8 years, Biden will have to leave office. And then there'll be potentially a sixth American president. 8 years from now, Putin will be, what, 76? He could ostensibly still be in power. And then there'll be a sixth American president or sixth or seventh British Prime Minister who has to deal with him. So the problem lies in Putin. And if he's going to be like those old Soviet leaders and basically a president for life, then unfortunately we're in for a very long period of tensions with Moscow. And it is sad. I'm not anti-Russia, the country. I would like us to have good relations with Russia. Um, The problem in the Yeltsin era, if anything, was that Yeltsin personally was not very popular with Russians in his final years. In the beginning, yes. So Russians associate the Yeltsin era with one of humiliation because Russia's influence had greatly declined after the Cold War. So what we need to do is, like I say, I don't think anything could really change under Putin. Um, but we need to be looking at who might succeed Putin in the long term and maybe making some overtures to them. But again, that's difficult so long as Putin is in absolute power. We cannot be talking to his number two. Certainly not Lavrov. Lavrov's way too close to Putin. But there may be pragmatists. I mean, of course, Alexei Navalny, but he is the anti-Putin. It may well be that it takes someone from sort of Putin's inner circle to finally replace him, and maybe they're more pragmatic. In the Medvedev years, there was some optimism, with the exception of Russia's involvement in the South Ossetia war, significant tensions over that. But Dmitry Medvedev personally was not as hardline as Putin. I was looking at pictures of the G20 2009 London summit yesterday. I think it was at that summit. There was pictures of Medvedev and Obama and Merkel getting on pretty well. So, we shouldn't totally dismiss any possible future with Russia, but I really believe so long as Putin is in power, then it's going to be very difficult. And what can we do? Well, one thing we can do is at least stand up for our values. Domestically in Britain, I think Ofcom needs to get its act together and strip the license of RT. I've said before the reasons why. Having a platform in a democracy doesn't mean you can abuse that platform. And when RT pushes conspiracy theories as news, when they so clearly push the agenda of the Russian government, I don't think they deserve a platform in this country. I really don't. And Ofcom done the right thing, stripping the license of CGTN, the Chinese mouthpiece. They should do the same with RT. Find RT, that's not enough. They need to strip the license. And I'm very frustrated with Ofcom's weakness. They have ample reasons to strip that license. The way RT responded to the Salisbury attack, indeed the way that they mocked Ofcom. RT has no respect for Ofcom, so that alone should be an indicator that this isn't going to change. I believe if we strip RT of its license, we strip them of the oxygen of pushing lies and conspiracy theories and Russian state propaganda. Why the hell should we give them a platform? You know, sure there'll be retaliatory actions. Probably the BBC will lose any operating licenses in Russia. So be it. That's the situation we're in. Do I think that we're in another Cold War? Difficult to say. I think we're pretty much at the worst relations have been since the end of the Cold War. Um, but is it a full-scale Cold War? It's not. It's not far off. I don't think it's far off. The only difference is the number of nuclear warheads on both sides is greatly decreased. Good thing. Um, but in terms of the mistrust, in terms of the frostiness, in terms of proxy wars, we can look at Syria. Is there really that much difference from the Cold War? I'm not sure that there is. And in fact, a big difference now is information technology. The rise of the internet, the rise of 24-hour media, those things didn't exist in the Cold War. So that actually complicates things, that actually adds another dynamic. So I would argue the situation potentially is as serious as the Cold War. Same with China. So yeah, in summary, I'm certainly not too optimistic about this summit. I don't know what Biden can really achieve. Certainly, RT will, you know, poke lots of holes and try to put RT will absolutely be waiting for Biden to mess up. They're craving it. They love it. They want to show Biden is weak, and of course they're Putin fanboys and fangirls, so they'll put him in a good light. Um, I think after this, there should be a sort of understanding in the West that summits for Putin don't make a difference because I don't think they do. Now, there's issues of just to conclude, mutual interest. Say Russians imprisoned in the United States, Americans imprisoned in Russia. I suppose you could argue diplomacy is necessary for securing somewhat sort of outcome there. But I mean, CNN argued that the State Department makes a case that the Americans imprisoned in Russia, their alleged crimes are much more minor than the Russians imprisoned in the United States. Guess that's a matter of perspective. Moscow would say otherwise. But I don't know. There isn't really any easy answer to this. Summit is going ahead. If nothing else, Biden needs be very blunt in his words. I remember when the Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper met Putin, he said, I guess I'll shake your hand, but you need to get the hell out of Ukraine. Fair play to Harper. Stephen Harper is one of the few Western politicians to really tell Putin to his face what he thinks of him and or what he thinks of his actions. I think we need more of that. Putin very much plays on the tough guy image. The West cannot afford weakness. Um, that unfortunately is the only avenue we can take. So don't totally cut off all links, but we just cannot be weak with Russia under Putin. That's the reality.